What would you do if your father kicked you out for dropping out of law school, told you you'd be nothing without him, and then 2 years later had to come begging for a contract from the company you built from scratch? This is the story of how I went from working at a coffee shop to owning my brother's law firm and having my father apply for help from the daughter he once called worthless. You know that feeling when you're sitting at a family dinner and there's this weight in your chest that just keeps getting heavier? That was me. Thanksgiving 2019, staring down at my plate of turkey and mashed potatoes while my father went on and on about Sebastian's latest promotion at his law firm. Sebastian just closed another major case, my dad, Gregory, announced, his voice booming across our dining room like he was addressing a courtroom. The partners are talking about fast-tracking him to senior associate. At this rate, he'll make partner before he's 35. My brother Sebastian just sat there with that smug little smile he'd perfected since we were kids. You know the one, the smile that says, "I'm the golden child," and we all know it. My mother Patricia nodded approvingly while serving herself more cranberry sauce. "That's wonderful, honey," she said to Sebastian, not even glancing in my direction. "Your father and I are so proud, Art." And there I was, 26 years old, sitting in the same chair I'd occupied every Thanksgiving since I was 5, feeling like I was slowly disappearing. See what they didn't know. What I'd been hiding for 6 months was that I wasn't in law school anymore. I dropped out of Columbia Law back in May, and I'd been too terrified to tell them. The thing is, when you grow up in a family like mine, failure isn't really an option that's discussed. My father, Gregory Langford, had built his entire identity around being this successful attorney. He'd started his own firm, Langford and Associates, when I was in middle school, and it had become his whole world. Success, achievement, prestige. These weren't just goals in our house, they were requirements. And Sebastian had always been the easy child. Straight A's, Harvard undergrad, Columbia Law, just like I was supposed to be doing. He fit into the mold perfectly, like he was designed for it. Me, I'd always been the one asking too many questions, wanting to know why we had to do things a certain way. But sitting there that night, listening to my dad go on about Sebastian's accomplishments, something inside me just broke. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly, like a thread that's been stretched too far, finally snapping. "So, Naomi?" My father turned to me and I could feel everyone's attention shift. "How are your classes going? You've been awfully quiet about school lately." My stomach dropped. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading for months. I could feel my mother's expectant gaze, Sebastian's amused expression, and my father's penetrating stare. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the sudden silence. "Actually, Dad," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." "Speak up, honey," my mother said, though there was already something cautious in her tone, like she could sense what was coming. I took a deep breath. "I left Columbia 6 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's fork clattered against his plates. Sebastian's smirk widened. My mother's hand flew to her chest like I'd just announced I was dying. "What do you mean you left?" My father's voice was dangerously quiet. That's the thing about my dad. He never started yelling right away. He'd get quiet first, and that's when you knew you were really in trouble. I withdrew from the program in May. I couldn't do it anymore. I hated every minute of it. The classes, the competition, the whole culture of it. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for you. My father's voice was rising now. "Naomi, do you have any idea what I've invested in your education? The connections I've made, the doors I've opened." "Gregory, please." My mother tried to intervene, but he held up a hand to silence her. "No, Patricia. She needs to hear this." He turned back to me, and I could see the veins in his forehead starting to bulge. "What exactly have you been doing for the past 6 months? While I've been telling my colleagues about my daughter at Columbia Law, what have you actually been doing?" This was the part I really didn't want to get into, because the truth was I'd been working at a coffee shop in the village trying to figure out my life. I'd been reading about renewable energy and sustainable technology. I'd been sketching business ideas on napkins during my breaks. I'd been, for the first time in my life, trying to figure out what I actually wanted instead of what everyone expected me to want. "I've been working," I said simply. "Working." Sebastian spoke up for the first time, and I could hear the barely contained laughter in his voice. "Doing what exactly?" "I'm working at a coffee shop and I'm exploring other opportunities." "A coffee shop?" My father's voice was flat now, which was somehow worse than the yelling. "My daughter, who I paid $150,000 to educate, is working at a coffee shop." "Dad, it's not about the money. It's not about the money!" He slammed his hand on the table, making all the dishes jump. "Naomi, everything is about the money. Do you think success just happens? Do you think opportunities just fall from the sky? I have worked my entire life to build something, to create a legacy, to give you and your brother every advantage, and you just throw it away to work at a coffee shop." I could feel tears starting to form, but I blinked them back. I would not cry. Not in front of them. "I'm trying to find my own path," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your own path?" My father stood up now, his face red with anger. "Let me tell you something about your own path, Naomi. Without my name, without my connections, without everything I've built, you are nothing. You hear me? Nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt Sebastian shift beside me, probably enjoying every second of this. My mother sat frozen, her mouth slightly open. "You want to throw away everything I've given you? Fine. But don't expect me to support this delusion that you can make it on your own. You'll be back, Naomi. You'll be back begging for my help when reality hits you." "Gregory," my mother finally found her voice, "maybe we should all just calm down and discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss, Patricia. She's made her choice." He looked at me with this expression of complete disappointment and disgust. "You know what? If you want to be independent so badly, if you want to reject everything we've given you, then you can start right now." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "I mean, get out. Get out of my house. If you want to be on your own so badly, then be on your own. Don't come back here expecting family dinners and support when you've thrown away every opportunity we've given you." I stared at him, shocked. This was my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who came to every school play, who used to read me bedtime stories. And he was throwing me out. On Thanksgiving. "Gregory, you can't be serious," my mother said, but her voice was weak, uncertain. "I'm completely serious. Naomi has made it clear that she doesn't value what this family has to offer. So let her see what the world has to offer instead." I looked around the table. Sebastian was trying to hide his smile behind his napkin. My mother looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't have the courage. And my father stood there unmovable, waiting for me to leave. "Fine," I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "If that's what you want..." "It's what you want, apparently," he shot back. I walked to the front hall where I'd left my coat. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices, my mother trying to reason with him, Sebastian probably making some snide comment. I grabbed my purse and my keys and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard my father's voice one more time. "Don't come crawling back when this all falls apart, Naomi. You'll be nothing without me, and deep down you know it." I opened the door and stepped out into the cold November rain. It was coming down hard, soaking through my sweater almost immediately. I didn't have an umbrella, didn't have anywhere specific to go. I just stood there for a moment on the front steps of the house I'd grown up in, watching the water drip off the ends of my hair. Behind me, through the warm glow of the dining room window, I could see them sitting back down to finish their Thanksgiving dinner. Like nothing had happened. Like I'd never been there at all. I got in my car and sat there for a few minutes, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The rain drummed against the roof, and I could feel that familiar weight in my chest again. But this time, it felt different. Heavier, yes, but also cleaner somehow. Like a burden I'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. My father's words echoed in my head, "You'll be nothing without me." As I drove away from that house for what I thought might be the last time I made myself a promise, I was going to prove him wrong. I didn't know how. Yet, I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to start, but I was going to prove that I could be something. Something real, something meaningful, something that was entirely my own. I just had no idea that less than 2 years later, my father would be the one with nothing, and I'd be the one he'd have to come to for help. But that night, driving through the rain with nowhere to go and $23 in my checking account, I was just a 26-year-old woman who'd finally told the truth and lost her family because of it. The hardest part wasn't the rain, or the uncertainty, or even the fear of what came next. The hardest part was the tiny voice in the back of my head that whispered, maybe he was right. Maybe I really would be nothing without him. That voice would haunt me for months, but it would also fuel me in ways I never could have imagined. 3 weeks later, I was living in a studio sublet in East LA that smelled like the previous tenant's cat and had a radiator that sounded like someone was trapped inside it banging to get out. The place cost me $800 a month, which was basically half my income from the coffee shop, but it was mine. No family portrait staring down at me, no expectations hanging in the air like expensive perfume. I remember the first morning I woke up there, sunlight streaming through these thin curtains that didn't quite cover the window, and for about 30 seconds, I forgot where I was. Then reality hit, along with the sound of my neighbor's music thumping through the paper-thin walls, and I realized this was my life now. No safety net, no family money, no connections. Just me and whatever I could figure out how to build. The coffee shop job was, well, it was exactly what you'd expect a coffee shop job to be. I was working at this place called Grind Coffee in the Village, pulling espresso shots and dealing with entitled customers who treated me like I was invisible. But here's the thing nobody tells you about rock bottom. It's actually kind of liberating. When you have nothing left to lose, you stop being afraid of losing things. During my breaks, I'd sit in the back alley with my notebook sketching out ideas. Not legal briefs or case studies like I'd been trained to do, but real ideas. Solutions to problems I actually cared about. I'd been reading about energy poverty, how millions of kids around the world couldn't study after dark because they didn't have electricity. How rural schools in developing countries were being left behind because they couldn't power computers or internet connections. And I kept thinking, what if there was a way to combine solar technology with educational infrastructure? What if you could create these self-contained learning hubs that could operate completely off-grid? I know it sounds naive sitting there in a coffee-stained apron, sketching solar panels on napkins, but something about it felt right. For the first time in my life, I was thinking about a problem I actually wanted to solve, not just a career path that would make my father proud. That's when I remembered Lena. Lena Castillo had been my roommate at MIT during my undergraduate years, back when I was studying engineering before my father convinced me to switch to pre-law. Lena was this brilliant, passionate woman who spoke 3 languages and always had dirt under her fingernails from whatever environmental project she was working on. We'd lost touch after I transferred to Columbia for law school, but I remembered she'd been passionate about sustainable development. So one night, after a particularly brutal shift where some Wall Street guy yelled at me for putting oat milk in his coffee instead of almond milk, I went home and started stalking her on LinkedIn. And there she was, Lena Castillo, Project Coordinator for Sustainable Education Initiative, working with NGOs across Latin America to improve rural school infrastructure. I stared at her profile picture for like 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to message her. What was I going to say? Hey, remember me? I'm the one who threw away a law degree to work at a coffee shop, but I have this crazy idea about solar-powered schools. But you know what? I'd already been kicked out of my family for following my instincts. What was one more risk? So I sent her a message. Just a simple, "Hey Lena, it's Naomi from MIT. I know it's been years, but I'd love to catch up if you're ever in New York." She responded within an hour. "Naomi, I was just thinking about you. I'm actually flying into JFK next week for a conference. Wanna grab coffee?" A week later, we met at this little cafe in Greenwich Village. I was nervous as hell, partly because I hadn't told her about my situation, and partly because I wasn't sure if my idea was brilliant or completely insane. Lena looked exactly the same. Long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing this colorful woven jacket that she'd probably bought from an artisan co-op somewhere. She had this energy about her, this sense of purpose that I remembered from college. "So," she said, after we'd ordered and caught up on the basics, "what are you working on these days? Last I heard you were at Columbia Law." This was it. The moment of truth. "I left law school," I said. "I'm working on something different now." Instead of the shocked expression I'd gotten from my family, Lena just nodded. "Good for you. Law school can be soul-crushing. What's the something different?" And so I told her. I told her about my idea for solar-powered learning hubs, about bringing educational technology to rural schools, about creating sustainable infrastructure that could operate independently of existing power grids. I pulled out my notebook and showed her my sketches, expecting her to politely tell me it was interesting, but impractical. Instead, her eyes lit up. "Naomi, this is exactly what we need," she said, leaning forward. "I've been working with schools in Honduras and Guatemala, and power infrastructure is the biggest barrier we face. We'll get funding for computers and internet equipment, but then we get to these rural areas and there's no reliable electricity to run anything." "Really?" I felt this surge of excitement mixed with relief. "You think it could actually work?" "I think it could revolutionize how we approach educational development." She grabbed a pen from her purse and started sketching on a napkin. "So, what if the learning hubs were modular, so you could scale them based on the size of the community?" And just like that, we were designing. Right there in the cafe over lukewarm lattes and shared pastries, we started building what would eventually become Brightcore Labs. Lena had the field experience and the connections with NGOs. I had the technical background, and it turned out a talent for understanding how to integrate different systems. We complemented each other perfectly. "I have some savings," Lena said after we'd been talking for 3 hours. "Not much, but enough to build a prototype, and I know people who could help us test it." "I don't have savings," I admitted. "I barely have rent money, but I can work on the technical design and I know how to research patents and regulations." "Then let's do it," she said, extending her hand across the table. "Partners." I shook her hand, and for the first time since that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, I felt like I was moving toward something instead of just running away from it. The next 6 months were the hardest and most exhilarating of my life. Lena moved to New York, and we basically lived out of my tiny studio apartment. We turned it into our headquarters, with technical drawings taped to every wall and prototype components scattered across every surface. We were broke. I mean, seriously broke. There were weeks when we lived on nothing but canned soup and ramen noodles. We'd buy coffee beans in bulk and make our own coffee because we couldn't afford to buy it from shops. I remember one particularly low point when we found a $20 bill in the couch cushions and treated it like we'd won the lottery. But we were building something real. Our first prototype was this chunky, inefficient thing that looked like someone had duct taped a solar panel to a laptop, but it worked. We could power a basic computer setup for 6 hours on a full charge, even on a cloudy day. Lena had connections with a school in rural Honduras that agreed to let us test it. The feedback was incredible. Teachers told us it was the first time they'd been able to run educational software consistently. Kids who had never seen a computer before were learning to code, but building prototypes and getting positive feedback from teachers is one thing. Building an actual business is something else entirely. We needed funding, real funding, which meant we needed to pitch to venture capitalists. Now, if you've never done a VC pitch before, Let me paint you a picture. You walk into these gleaming conference rooms filled with people in $1,000 suits who have the power to make or break your entire future with a single decision. They ask you questions designed to poke holes in your business model, your projections, your entire existence, and they judge you on everything. Your presentation, your numbers, your potential market size, whether they think you have what it takes to scale a business. Our first pitch was a disaster. We walked into this firm in Midtown, and I was so nervous I spilled coffee on my notes before we even started. The lead partner listened to our presentation for about 10 minutes before cutting us off and saying, "This sounds like a nice nonprofit project, but we invest in businesses that can scale profitably." Rejection number 1. The second pitch went better but ended with, "Come back when you have more traction." Rejection number 2. By the 5th rejection, I started taking notes on their feedback. By the 10th, I was refining our pitch based on their questions. By the 15th, I was starting to understand the language they wanted to hear. But understanding the language and actually getting them to say yes are two very different things. Rejection number 16 came from a firm that kept us waiting for 2 hours, then told us they didn't invest in hardware plays. Number 17 said our market was too niche. Number 18 wanted to see more scalable revenue models. I remember sitting in Lena's car after rejection number 20, just staring at the steering wheel. We'd been living on hope and instant noodles for months, and I was starting to wonder if my father had been right. Maybe I really was nothing without his connections and support. "You know what the worst part is?" I said to Lena. "I can't even call my family to complain. They'd just say, 'I told you so.'" "The worst part," Lena said, "is that every single one of these guys is missing the point. They're so focused on quarterly returns that they can't see the bigger picture." "Maybe the bigger picture doesn't matter if we can't get anyone to fund it." Lena turned to me with this fierce expression. "Naomi, I've seen what our prototype can do. I've watched 8-year-olds in rural Guatemala light up when they see their first computer screen. That matters more than anything any of these suits have ever funded. But if we can't get funding, then we find the right investor, someone who actually gets it." She was right, of course. But at that point, I was starting to run out of steam and money. My savings were completely depleted, I was behind on rent, and the coffee shop was threatening to cut my hours because I kept asking for time off for pitch meetings. That's when we heard about Vivica Ventures. Vivica Ventures was different from the other firms we'd been pitching to. They specialized in impact investing, funding companies that could generate both financial returns and positive social outcomes. Their portfolio included clean energy startups, sustainable agriculture companies, and educational technology firms. When we researched their partners, we found out that the founding partner, Sarah Vivica, had started her career in the Peace Corps, working on rural development projects in Africa. "This is it," Lena said when we got the email inviting us to pitch. "This is the one." But here's the thing about hope. The more you've been disappointed, the harder it becomes to believe that this time will be different. As we prepared for what would be our 24th pitch, I found myself trying not to get too excited. I'd learned to expect rejection, to prepare for the polite but firm no that had become so familiar. We spent 2 weeks preparing for the Vivica pitch. We refined our presentation, updated our financial projections, and practiced our answers to every possible question. Lena even bought us both new outfits, the first new clothes either of us had purchased in months. The night before the pitch, we sat in my apartment going over our notes one more time. The walls were still covered with our technical drawings and prototype components, but now they also had rejection letters mixed in. 23 of them, to be exact. "What if this doesn't work?" I asked Lena. "What if they say no too?" "Then we try again," she said simply. "But Naomi, I have a good feeling about this one." I wanted to believe her. After 6 months of rejections and instant noodles and sleeping on an air mattress because we'd sold my bed to pay for prototype components, I wanted to believe that someone somewhere would see what we were trying to build and understand why it mattered. The next morning, we took the subway to the Vivica Ventures office in Soho. As we walked into the building, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the lobby mirror. I looked different than I had 6 months ago. Thinner, yes, but also more focused, like I'd been refined by the experience of building something from nothing. We were about to find out if 6 months of believing in ourselves would finally be enough to convince someone else to believe in us too. The Vivica Ventures pitch went better than any of our previous 23 attempts, but I was trying not to read too much into that. Sarah Vivica and her team asked thoughtful questions about scalability and impact metrics, and they actually seemed to understand what we were trying to accomplish. But I'd learned not to trust my instincts about how these meetings went. "We'll be in touch within 2 weeks," Sarah had said as we wrapped up shaking both our hands with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. This is exactly the kind of innovation the world needs right now. 2 weeks turned into 3. 3 weeks turned into a month. By then, we were in serious trouble, not just financially struggling, but actually facing eviction. My landlord had already served me with a 30-day notice, and we'd maxed out both of our credit cards just to keep the prototype development going. Lena had been sleeping on my couch for weeks because she couldn't afford her own place anymore. We'd moved our office to this 24-hour diner in Queens, where they let us sit for hours as long as we kept ordering coffee. The Wi-Fi was terrible, and the fluorescent lights gave me headaches, but it was better than trying to work in my studio with the constant noise from my neighbors. I remember this one particularly dark moment about 5 weeks after the Vivica pitch when we were sitting in that diner at 2 in the morning. I was calculating how much money we had left. It was something like $347 between both of us, and trying to figure out if we could afford to eat dinner and still have enough for subway fare to our last 2 scheduled pitch meetings. "Maybe we should start looking for real jobs," I said, staring at the numbers I'd written on a napkin. "I could probably get my job back at the coffee shop and you could—" "No." Lena interrupted, not even looking up from her laptop where she was updating our impact projections. "We're not giving up now, not when we're this close." Close to what we've been rejected by every major VC firm in the city. Our bank accounts are empty. I'm about to be homeless. "We're close to proving that everyone who said no was wrong," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "Naomi, 6 months ago, you were working at a coffee shop with an idea sketched on napkins. Now we have working prototypes deployed in 3 countries and data showing real educational impact. That's not nothing." She was right, but being right doesn't pay rent, and it definitely doesn't keep your lights on when you're 2 months behind on your electric bill. That's when my phone rang. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and my phone was ringing with a number I didn't recognize. Normal people don't call at 2:47 a.m. unless someone is dead or in jail, so I almost didn't answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Naomi, this is Sarah Vivica. I hope I'm not calling too late." My heart stopped. Lena looked up from her laptop and I could see the question in her eyes. I put the call on speaker. "No, not at all," I lied. "We're night owls," Sarah laughed. "I figured you might be. Listen, I know we said 2 weeks, and it's been much longer than that. We've been doing extensive due diligence, talking to your pilot schools, reviewing your technical specifications, analyzing your market projections." Here it comes, I thought. The polite rejection, the "we're impressed but not quite ready to invest" speech I'd heard so many variations of. "And I'm calling because we'd like to make you an offer." Wait, what? An offer, I managed to say. Vivica Ventures would like to lead a $30 million Series A funding round for Brightcore Labs. I stared at Lena. She stared back. Neither of us said anything for what felt like an hour, but was probably only about 10 seconds. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "Did you say 30 million? 30 million? Sarah confirmed. "We believe Brightcore has the potential to transform educational access globally, and we want to be part of that transformation." Lena grabbed my arm so hard I'm pretty sure she left bruises. I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "There are some conditions, of course," Sarah continued. "We'll want board representation, quarterly progress reports, and we'd like to discuss expanding your pilot programs to include partnerships in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa." "Of course," I said, though honestly she could have asked us to relocate the entire company to Mars at that point, and I would have said yes. There's one more thing, Sarah said. I sit on the advisory board for the Global Access Council. It's a UN-affiliated policy board focused on educational equity and sustainable development. Based on what you've accomplished with Brightcore, I'd like to nominate you for membership. Would you be interested? I looked at Lena, who was now crying openly and nodding vigorously. Yes, I said. Yes, I would be very interested. Excellent. I'll send over the term sheet tomorrow morning. Congratulations, Naomi. You're about to change the world. After we hung up, Lena and I just sat there in that fluorescent-lit diner staring at each other. The reality of what had just happened was too big to process all at once. Did that really just happen? Lena whispered. I think so, I said. I think we just got $30 million. And then we both started crying. Not quiet tears, but full-on ugly sobbing crying. The kind of crying that comes from months of stress and uncertainty, and believing in something, when everyone else thinks you're crazy and then suddenly finding out you weren't crazy after all. The night shift waitress came over to check on us, probably thinking someone had died. Everything okay, honey? She asked. We just got funded, Lena managed to say between sobs. Our company just got funded. The waitress looked confused, but she smiled and brought us a box of tissues. Well, congratulations then, first round's on the house. We stayed in that diner until the sun came up, calling our pilot schools to share the news, making lists of everything we needed to do, and just trying to wrap our minds around the fact that our lives had completely changed in the span of a single phone call. But here's the thing about sudden success. It's overwhelming in ways you can't prepare for. As we walked out of the diner into the early morning light, I felt this strange mix of euphoria and terror. We'd gotten everything we'd asked for, but now we actually had to deliver on all the promises we'd made. By noon that day, we'd signed a lease on real office space in a co-working building in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, just a small room with windows and reliable Wi-Fi, but after months of working out of diners and my studio apartment, it felt like a palace. I'll never forget the moment I walked into that empty office for the first time. Lena was on a call with one of our pilot schools explaining that we'd be able to expand their program significantly. I stepped outside into the alley behind the building, pulled out my phone, and called my father. Just kidding, I absolutely did not call my father. Instead, I sat down on a milk crate behind a dumpster and completely lost it. All the stress and fear and uncertainty of the past 8 months came pouring out of me. I cried for the Thanksgiving dinner where I'd been kicked out of my family. I cried for all those nights I'd fallen asleep wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I cried for the 23 rejections and the instant noodles and the constant fear that maybe my father had been right about me. But mostly I cried because I'd proven him wrong. Here I was, 8 months after he'd told me I'd be nothing without him, and I'd just secured $30 million in funding for a company I'd built from scratch. I was about to join a UN-affiliated policy board. I had employees and responsibilities and the opportunity to impact millions of children's lives, and he had no idea any of it was happening. That afternoon, I went apartment hunting, not for another sublet or studio, but for a real one-bedroom apartment in a nice building with a doorman and everything. I put down a security deposit on a place in Park Slope with hardwood floors and a kitchen that had more than one burner. When the real estate agent asked what I did for work, I said, I'm the founder and CEO of Brightcore Labs, and for the first time, it felt completely real. Lena became our chief operating officer, and we started hiring immediately. Our first employee was Marcus Chen, a recent MIT graduate who specialized in sustainable energy systems. Our second was Elena Rodriguez, who had experience scaling educational programs in Latin America. Within 6 weeks, we had a team of 12 people working out of our Brooklyn office. Within 3 months, we had active programs running in 15 schools across Honduras, Guatemala, and Indonesia, with plans to expand to Kenya and the Philippines. The UN Global Access Council appointment came through in November, almost exactly a year after that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. I got the official letter on a Tuesday morning, and I remember staring at the letterhead for a long time. The United Nations Economic and Social Council cordially invites Ms. Naomi Langford to serve as a member of the Global Access Council. My father's voice echoed in my head. You'll be nothing without me. I was now advising the United Nations on global education policy. The crazy part was I still hadn't told my family about any of it. Not the funding, not the company, not the UN appointment. I'd changed my LinkedIn profile and we'd gotten some press coverage, but it was all in trade publications and tech blogs that I knew they didn't read. Part of me was waiting for the right moment to tell them. But if I'm being honest, a bigger part of me was enjoying the secret. For the first time in my life, I had accomplished something entirely on my own without their input or approval or even their knowledge. I'd built something real, something meaningful, something that was changing lives. And I'd done it starting from the exact position my father had put me in, with nothing but my own determination and the willingness to prove him wrong. But I was about to learn that secrets, especially success secrets, have a way of revealing themselves at the most unexpected moments. During our expansion into Indonesia, we partnered with this incredible organization called Education Without Borders. Their country director, Dr. James Sullivan, had been working in sustainable development for 15 years and had connections throughout the NGO community. At our first strategy meeting in Jakarta, Dr. Sullivan mentioned that he'd recently presented at a conference in New York about rural education challenges. Interesting crowd, he said. Lots of lawyers and policy people. There was this one guy, Gregory Langford, who kept asking questions about funding sources for international education projects. Said he was exploring pro bono opportunities for his firm. My blood ran cold. Gregory Langford, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, you know him, runs some law firm in Manhattan. Seemed very interested in getting involved with education work, especially anything involving government contracts or international funding. I exchanged a look with Lena, who knew exactly what I was thinking. My father was sniffing around international education funding, the same space where I was now making significant waves. It was only a matter of time before our paths crossed professionally. The question was, would he figure out who I was before I was ready to reveal myself? As it turned out, I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. Because 3 weeks after that conversation in Jakarta, I got an email that changed everything. It was from the Global Access Council Secretariat, informing me that the next quarterly meeting would include presentations from several law firms seeking to partner with UN agencies on education policy implementation. One of those firms was Langford and Associates. My father was going to be pitching for a contract to work with the organization I helped govern, and he still had no idea his daughter was the one who would be evaluating his proposal. While I was building Brightcore Labs and joining UN policy boards, my family was living in a completely different reality. As far as they knew, I was still finding myself, somewhere in the city, probably still working at that coffee shop. Maybe finally ready to come crawling back and admit that my father had been right all along. I found this out through the most unexpected source imaginable. I was in Los Angeles for the annual Sustainable Tech Innovation Gala, this massive industry event, where all the major players in clean technology come together to network and show off their latest developments. Brightcore Labs had been invited to present our rural education platform. And it was a huge honor. We had a booth right next to Tesla's energy division and across from some major solar companies. The event was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I just finished giving a presentation about our expansion into Southeast Asia when I spotted a familiar face across the room, Kelly Morrison, Sebastian's ex-girlfriend from college. Kelly and Sebastian had dated for almost 3 years, and she'd been around for enough family dinners that I knew her pretty well. She was smart, ambitious, and honestly too good for my brother, which is probably why they eventually broke up. Last I'd heard she was working in tech somewhere in California. I tried to avoid eye contact and blend into the crowd, but she'd already seen me. She was walking over with this confused expression like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Naomi, she said, reaching me by the Brightcore Labs display booth. Naomi Langford, what are you doing here? Hey, Kelly? I said, trying to sound casual. I'm here with my company. She looked around at our booth, taking in the Brightcore Labs banners, the prototype displays, and the professional marketing materials. Your company, she said slowly. I thought you were in law school. I was. Things changed. Kelly picked up one of our brochures and started reading. I watched her eyes get wider as she took in the information about our funding, our partnerships, our global reach. Wait, she said, looking back up at me. You're the founder of Brightcore Labs, the Brightcore Labs that just got featured in TechCrunch for raising $30 million. That would be us, I said, and I couldn't help but smile a little at her shocked expression. Holy shit, Naomi, I had no idea. This is incredible. She was flipping through our brochure, shaking her head in amazement. Does your family know about this? And there it was. The question I'd been dreading, but also somehow looking forward to. Not exactly, I said. What do you mean, not exactly? I glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. I mean, they have no idea. As far as they know, I'm still finding myself after dropping out of Columbia. Kelly stared at me like I'd just told her I was secretly a superhero. And Naomi, you're on the board of a UN council. I just read about your appointment in the Wall Street Journal. How do they not know? Because I haven't told them. Why not? That was a harder question to answer than you might think. Why hadn't I told them? Was it because I was still angry about how they'd treated me? Was it because I wanted to prove something to myself before proving it to them? Or was it because I was enjoying having something that was entirely mine without their opinions or expectations or attempts to take credit? It's complicated, I said finally. Kelly nodded slowly. Sebastian still talks about you sometimes, you know. He feels bad about how that last Thanksgiving went down. Does he really? I asked, and I could hear the skepticism in my own voice. Well, maybe bad is a strong word, but he asks about you, your parents too, your mom especially. She worries. What do they think I'm doing? Honestly, they think you're probably working retail or food service somewhere, maybe finally ready to admit you made a mistake and come home. Your dad keeps saying you'll be back when you realize how hard the real world is. I felt that familiar mixture of anger and sadness that always came up when I thought about my family. Even after everything I'd accomplished, they were still waiting for me to fail, still expecting me to come crawling back and validate their view of the world. Kelly, I said, can I ask you a favor? Don't mention that you saw me here. Don't tell Sebastian about Brightcore Labs. Not yet. She looked at me curiously. Why not? Because I want to tell them myself. When I'm ready. Okay, she said. But Naomi, you should tell them. What you've built here is amazing. They should be proud of you. After Kelly walked away, I stood there for a moment, thinking about what she'd said. Should my family be proud of me? Yes, probably. But the fact that they weren't even aware there was anything to be proud of told me everything I needed to know about how little they'd actually known me. 2 weeks after the LA Gala, I was back in New York when Lena forwarded me an article from the Legal Business Journal that made my blood run cold. Langford and Associates suffers major setback in green energy litigation. The article detailed how my father's firm had lost a high-profile case representing a solar energy company against federal regulators. It was the kind of case that should have been a slam dunk for a firm with their reputation, but apparently they'd misunderstood some key federal compliance requirements and their client had ended up paying significant penalties. The loss had cost them not only the case but also several major clients who were questioning the firm's expertise in the rapidly evolving field of sustainable energy law. Gregory Langford, founding partner of Langford and Associates, acknowledged that the firm is reassessing its approach to environmental and energy regulations. The article quoted, "We're exploring new partnerships and educational opportunities to ensure we remain at the forefront of this critical area of law." I read that quote 3 times. New partnerships and educational opportunities. That was lawyer speak for, we're scrambling to figure out what we missed. But it was the last paragraph of the article that really caught my attention. Sources close to the firm suggest that Langford and Associates is actively pursuing federal contracts and international partnerships to rebuild their reputation in the sustainable energy sector. The firm has reportedly submitted several proposals for government sustainability consulting work. Federal contracts, international partnerships, sustainability consulting. My father was pivoting his entire firm toward the exact space where I'd become a recognized expert. 3 days later, the other shoe dropped. I was reviewing applications for our next Global Access Council quarterly meeting when I saw it. Proposal for Legal and Regulatory Support Services, Langford and Associates LLP. My father had submitted a formal proposal asking the Global Access Council to contract with his firm for legal support on international education and sustainability initiatives. I sat in my office staring at the application packet, trying to process what was happening. The proposal was actually well-written and comprehensive. It outlined how Langford and Associates could help navigate the complex regulatory environments in developing countries, assist with compliance issues for education technology deployments, and provide legal frameworks for sustainable development partnerships. It was exactly the kind of legal support that organizations like the Global Access Council needed. And under normal circumstances, it might have been a competitive proposal. But these weren't normal circumstances. Because the person reviewing this proposal was the daughter he'd kicked out of the house for refusing to follow the path he'd laid out for her. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was my father, the man who'd told me I'd be nothing without him asking for a contract from an organization where I held significant influence. He was trying to break into a field where I was already established as a thought leader using credentials and connections I'd built completely independently of him. And he had absolutely no idea. I called Lena into my office and showed her the proposal. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked after reading through it. "Yep, my father wants the Global Access Council to hire his firm." "And he doesn't know you're on the council. He doesn't even know I have a job, let alone that I'm advising the UN on education policy." Lena sat back in her chair, shaking her head. "This is like something out of a movie. I know, I keep waiting for someone to tell me this isn't really happening." "So, what are you going to do?" That was the question I'd been asking myself since I'd seen the proposal. What was I going to do? I could recuse myself from reviewing the application site, a conflict of interest. But that would require explaining the conflict, which would mean revealing my identity before I was ready. I could review it objectively and recommend approval if it met our criteria. But honestly, while the proposal was decent, it wasn't exceptional. There were other firms with more relevant experience applying for the same contract. Or I could do what every instinct in my body was telling me to do, use this opportunity to show my father exactly what I'd become without his help. "I think," I said slowly, "that I'm going to let this play out naturally." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to review his proposal fairly alongside all the others, and then I'm going to be sitting at the table when they announce the results." As it turned out, I wouldn't have to wait long for that moment. The next Global Access Council meeting was scheduled for the following month, and applicant presentations were on the agenda. All the firms that had submitted proposals would be invited to present their capabilities in person to the full council, which meant my father was going to walk into a room and pitch his services to a board that included his daughter. The daughter, he'd told, would be nothing without him. But while I was planning for that confrontation, something else was happening that I didn't know about yet. Something that would make our eventual reunion even more dramatic than I'd imagined. Sebastian's firm was also struggling. I found this out through another unexpected source, a former Columbia classmate who worked at a legal recruiting firm. We'd run into each other at a networking event, and during our conversation, she mentioned that several mid-level associates from prestigious Manhattan firms had been reaching out about new opportunities. "The market's been tough lately," she said. "A lot of firms are struggling with the transition to ESG compliance and sustainability law. There's this whole generation of lawyers who built their careers on traditional corporate work, and now clients are demanding expertise in environmental and social governance issues. Which firms are struggling the most? I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew the answer. Well, I probably shouldn't name names, but I've had several associates from Hartwell Klein and Associates asking about openings. They lost 3 major clients last quarter. Hartwell Klein and Associates, Sebastian's firm. What kind of clients? Corporate clients who wanted ESG consulting that the firm couldn't provide. It's becoming a real problem for traditional firms. They either need to hire new expertise or risk losing clients to boutique firms that specialize in sustainability law. After that conversation, I did some research on Sebastian's firm. What I found was a company in trouble. They'd lost several major clients over the past 6 months, their revenue was down significantly, and they were rumored to be considering layoffs. Sebastian, the golden child who could do no wrong, was working for a sinking ship. And the field that could save both his firm and our father's firm was the exact field where I'd built my reputation and expertise. The same week I discovered Sebastian's problems, I got a call from Sarah Vivica with some unexpected news. "Naomi, I just got off the phone with the mayor's Office of Sustainability," she said. "They're launching a major initiative to integrate clean technology into public education, and they want Brightcore Labs to be the lead technology partner." "That's amazing," I said. "What does that involve?" "A $50 million contract to deploy your learning hubs across the entire New York City public school system. It would be the largest single contract in Brightcore's history." $50 million. For a contract that would put our technology in hundreds of schools across the 5 boroughs. It was the kind of deal that would cement Brightcore Labs as a major player in the education technology space. "There's just one thing," Sarah continued. "The city requires significant legal support for a contract this size. We'll need to partner with a law firm that has experience in municipal contracts, education law, and sustainability compliance. Do you have any recommendations?" "Actually, yes. There are 3 firms that specialize in this kind of work. I'll send you their information." When Sarah's email arrived an hour later, I opened the attachment and started reading through the profiles of the recommended law firms. And there, at the bottom of the list, was a firm I recognized, Hartwell Klein and Associates. Sebastian's firm was being recommended as a potential legal partner for Brightcore Labs' biggest contract ever. Which meant there was a very real possibility that Sebastian would soon discover not only that his sister owned a successful company, but that his own career prospects might depend on that company's success. The pieces were all falling into place for a confrontation that would reveal exactly how much our family dynamics had changed since that Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. My father was seeking contracts in my field of expertise. Sebastian's firm needed exactly the kind of work that my company could provide, and I was positioned to control both of their professional futures. They just didn't know it yet. 2 years. It had been exactly 2 years since that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner when my father kicked me out in the rain. And now, Thanksgiving 2021 was approaching, and I had a decision to make. Lena had invited me to spend the holiday with her family in Queens. Her parents, who had immigrated from El Salvador in the 80s, had basically adopted me as an honorary daughter over the past 2 years. They knew my story. They'd celebrated every milestone with us. And Mrs. Castillo had been trying to feed me back to health since the day we got our first funding check. "You should come," Lena said, as we were wrapping up work the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. "My mom's making enough food for an army, and you know she'll guilt trip you if you don't show up." "I'll be there," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." "Good. And Naomi, bring something nice to wear. I have a feeling this Thanksgiving might be different." I didn't know what she meant by that, but I should have recognized the gleam in her eye. Lena was planning something. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and drizzly, but the Castillo house was warm and full of laughter when I arrived that afternoon. Lena's cousins were there, her aunt and uncle from New Jersey, and about 15 other people who I'd met at various Brightcore company events. It was the kind of family gathering I'd always wished I could have, loud, chaotic, and full of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We were just sitting down to dinner when Lena's phone rang. I'll just turn it off, she said, but then she looked at the caller ID and her expression changed. Actually, I need to take this. Give me 2 minutes. She stepped into the kitchen and I could hear her talking in low, urgent tones. When she came back, she had this secretive smile that made me nervous. Everything okay? I asked. Everything's perfect, she said. But we need to make a quick stop after dinner. A stop where, you'll see. 3 hours later, after we'd eaten way too much turkey and tres leches cake, Lena dragged me out to her car. Where are we going? I asked as she started driving toward Manhattan. Your parents' house. My stomach dropped. What, Lena? No, absolutely not. Naomi, it's time. Time for what? Time for them to know who you are. Time for them to see what you've built. Time for you to stop hiding. I'm not hiding, You're hiding, she said firmly. And I get it. I understand why, but you've proven everything you needed to prove. You've built a company that's changing lives around the world. You're advising the United Nations. You're about to close the biggest contract in Brightcore's history. They need to know. Why today? Why now? Because, she said, glancing at me sideways, your father's Global Access Council proposal is being reviewed next week, and you're going to have to face him anyway. Better to do it on your terms. I stared out the window as we drove through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood. The houses looked the same, but everything felt different. Smaller somehow. Less intimidating. What if they slam the door in my face? Then we leave. But Naomi, what if they don't? 30 minutes later, we were parked outside my parents' house. I could see warm light glowing from the dining room windows, and I knew they were probably still sitting around the table digesting their dinner, and maybe playing cards like they always did on Thanksgiving. I can't do this, I said. Yes, you can. Lena squeezed my hand. You're the CEO of a company that just got valued at over $200 million. You've testified before Congress about education policy. You can handle one family dinner. She was right, of course. But knowing you can do something and actually doing it are two very different things. I took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. The same door I'd walked out of 2 years ago, believing I might never be welcome back. I rang the doorbell. I could hear footsteps and then my mother's voice calling, I'll get it. The door opened and there was Patricia Langford looking exactly the same, except for a few more gray hairs and new lines around her eyes. She stared at me for a long moment, her mouth slightly open. Naomi? Hi, Mom. Oh my God. Naomi, she pulled me into a hug before I could react. What are you doing here? Why didn't you call? You look wonderful. I brought a friend, I said, gesturing to Lena, who was walking up the front steps. Mom, this is Lena Castillo. Lena, this is my mother, Patricia. It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Langford, Lena said, shaking my mother's hand. Please come in, my mother said, ushering us into the foyer. Gregory, Sebastian, come see who's here. I heard chairs scraping in the dining room and then my father and brother appeared in the hallway. My father stopped short when he saw me, his expression unreadable. Sebastian looked genuinely surprised, but not necessarily unhappy. Naomi, my father said carefully, this is unexpected. I know I should have called, I said, but we were in the neighborhood and I thought, well, it's Thanksgiving. Of course, my mother said quickly. You're always welcome here, both of you. Have you eaten? We have so much food left over. We actually just came from dinner, I said. But thank you. An awkward silence settled over the group. We were all standing in the hallway like we weren't sure what to do next. Maybe we should sit down, Sebastian suggested. Catch up. We moved into the living room, the same room where I'd grown up, where I'd done homework and watched movies and had countless family meetings. But now, I felt like a stranger in it. So, my father said once we were all seated, how have you been? What are you doing these days? This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating for 2 years. I've been good, I said. Really good, actually. I started a company. A company, my mother leaned forward. What kind of company? We develop solar-powered educational technology for rural schools in developing countries. It's called Brightcore Labs. My father's eyebrows went up slightly. That sounds interesting. Is it profitable? I almost laughed. Of course, that would be his first question. Yes, Dad, it's profitable. We've raised over $50 million in funding, and we're currently operating in 12 countries. The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian was staring at me like I'd just announced I was an alien. My mother's mouth was hanging open again. My father looked skeptical. $50 million, Sebastian said finally. Naomi, that's incredible. Thank you. When did this happen? My mother asked. I started developing the concept about 6 months after I left Colombia. Lena and I have been building it together for the past 2 years. 2 years, my father repeated. You've been running a company for 2 years and never mentioned it. You kicked me out of the house, Dad. We haven't exactly been in regular communication. But $50 million in funding, Sebastian said, and I could hear something like awe in his voice. That's more than most law firms see in revenue. It's been a good couple of years, I said modestly. My father was quiet for a moment, and I could see him processing this information. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured but dismissive. Well, he said, I suppose congratulations are in order, though I have to say the tech startup world is notoriously volatile. Today's unicorn is tomorrow's bankruptcy filing. It's good that you've had some early success, but I hope you're not counting on it lasting. There it was. Even faced with undeniable evidence of my success, he still couldn't resist trying to diminish it. Actually, Sebastian interjected, the sustainability tech sector has been incredibly stable lately. ESG investing is one of the fastest growing areas in venture capital. I looked at my brother surprised. Since when did Sebastian know anything about venture capital? Sebastian's been learning about ESG compliance, my mother explained. His firm has been trying to pivot toward environmental law. How's that going? I asked. Sebastian's expression darkened slightly. It's been challenging. The regulatory environment is complex, and there aren't many experienced practitioners in the field. Most of the expertise is in the tech sector, Lena added helpfully. Companies like Brightcore Labs that work directly with international development organizations. My father's eyes sharpened. International development organizations? What kind of organizations? NGOs, government agencies, UN affiliates? I said. We work closely with the Global Access Council on Education Policy. I watched my father's face change as he heard the name. His expression went from skeptical interest to something approaching shock. The Global Access Council, he repeated. Yes, they're a UN-affiliated board that focuses on educational equity and sustainable development. I'm actually a member. A member? My father's voice was strangely quiet. She's being modest, Lena said with a grin. Naomi doesn't just work with the Global Access Council. She's one of their youngest board members ever. She helps set policy for international education initiatives. The color was draining from my father's face. Sebastian looked confused, but my mother was starting to smile. Naomi, that's wonderful, she said. The United Nations, I had no idea you were involved with anything like that. There's a lot you don't know about what I've been doing, I said gently. My father cleared his throat. This Global Access Council, he said carefully, do they contract with private firms for legal services? And there it was. The question I'd been waiting for. Sometimes, I said. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason. Just curious about how those organizations operate. Lena caught my eye and gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was time. Actually, Dad, that's funny you should ask. We just reviewed a bunch of applications from law firms wanting to work with the council. Really? His voice was tightly controlled. Yes, some really impressive firms applied. Though honestly, most of them didn't have the relevant experience we were looking for. Sebastian was looking back and forth between us, like he was watching a tennis match and couldn't follow the ball. What kind of experience were you looking for? My father asked. Expertise in international education, law, sustainability, compliance, NGO partnerships, that kind of thing. Most traditional corporate firms just don't have that background. I see. Although, Lena said, and I could hear the mischief in her voice, there was one interesting development this week. Oh, I played along. That firm we've been negotiating with for the New York City schools contract, the one Sebastian mentioned, Hartwell Klein and Associates. Sebastian's head snapped up. You know my firm. Know it. Lena smiled. We just acquired it. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You what? Sebastian whispered. Brightcore Labs acquired Hartwell Klein and Associates yesterday, I said. We needed legal expertise for our expansion into municipal contracts, and your firm needed clients who could pay their bills. It worked out perfectly for everyone. Sebastian was staring at me like I'd just rearranged the laws of physics. You bought my firm. We bought your firm. Which means, Lena continued cheerfully, that Sebastian now works for Naomi. My father had gone completely pale. My mother was covering her mouth with her hands, but I could see she was trying not to smile. There's one more thing, I said, looking directly at my father. That Global Access Council application I mentioned, the one from Langford and Associates. My father's eyes widened. I'll be voting on that next week. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Sebastian spoke. You're voting on Dad's application. I'm on the review board, yes. And you own my firm. As of yesterday, yes. Sebastian put his head in his hands. This is insane. It's karma, my mother said quietly, and we all turned to look at her. I'm sorry, but it is. Gregory, you told her she'd be nothing without you. You kicked her out of this house for following her dreams. And now look at her. Patricia, my father started. No, Gregory, look at her. Really look at her. Our daughter built something amazing, something that's changing the world, and she did it without any help from us. In fact, she did it despite us. My father was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller. Naomi, he said, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, Dad. Yes, I do. I was wrong about everything. About you, about what you could accomplish, about what you needed from us. He paused, struggling with the words. I was so focused on the path I thought you should take that I couldn't see the path you were actually on. I felt tears starting to form, but I blinked them back. I just wanted you to believe in me. I should have. I should have believed in you from the beginning. For what it's worth, Sebastian said, I think what you've built is incredible, and I'm sorry about how I acted that night. I was jealous, I think. Jealous that you had the courage to walk away from something that wasn't right for you. You were jealous? Naomi, I've hated every day of law school and every day of practice since. But I was too scared to disappoint Dad the way you did. Turns out, you were the brave one. My mother was crying now, but they were happy tears. I'm so proud of you, she said. I should have said that 2 years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you for following your heart, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Thank you, I said, and I realized I was crying too. So, my father said, after a moment, about that Global Access Council application. I looked at him for a long moment. I'll review it fairly, Dad, just like all the others. And Sebastian's firm, Sebastian will always have a job as long as he wants one. Family is family. Even after everything, I thought about it for a moment. 2 years ago, I'd left this house broken and angry, convinced that my family would never understand or support me. Tonight, I was sitting in the same room as a successful entrepreneur, a UN policy advisor, and the person who controlled both my father's and brother's professional futures. But more than that, I was sitting here as someone who had proven to herself that she could build something meaningful without anyone's permission or approval. Yes, I said finally, even after everything. My father nodded slowly. Thank you. Besides, I added with a small smile, someone needs to teach your firm how to handle sustainability law, and I happen to know someone with relevant experience. For the first time in 2 years, my father smiled at me like he was genuinely proud. I'd appreciate that. As Lena and I drove home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd proven my father wrong, though I definitely had, but because I'd finally gotten to show my family who I'd become. How does it feel? Lena asked. Different than I thought it would, I said. Better. Think you'll start having family dinners again? I considered it. Maybe, but this time they'll be at my place. The Global Access Council meeting was scheduled for the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. 5 days after I'd revealed everything to my family, I was sitting in a conference room at the United Nations headquarters in Manhattan, surrounded by policy experts, government officials, and development professionals from around the world. And I was about to review my father's application for legal services. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2.5 years earlier, I'd been a law school dropout working at a coffee shop. Now, I was sitting at the same table as deputy ministers and UN officials helping to decide which firms would receive multi-million-dollar consulting contracts. The next item on our agenda, said Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the council chair, is the review of legal services applications. We received 43 proposals from firms seeking to support our international education initiatives. I had my folder open in front of me with detailed reviews of all 43 applications. I'd spent the weekend going through each one, carefully scoring them based on relevant experience, proposed costs, and track record with international development work. My father's application was adequate. Not terrible, but not exceptional either. Langford and Associates had some relevant experience with federal contracting, and they'd clearly done their research on the regulatory requirements for international education projects. But they lacked the specific expertise that several other firms possessed. More importantly, they lacked any real understanding of the communities they'd be serving. The application read like it had been written by lawyers, for lawyers with lots of technical language, about compliance frameworks and regulatory matrices, but very little acknowledgement of the human impact of the work. Naomi, Dr. Chen said, you've been leading our Legal Services Review Committee. Would you like to present your findings? I stood up, my heart pounding. Somewhere in Manhattan, my father was probably sitting in his office hoping to hear that his firm had been selected for this contract. He had no idea that his daughter was the one making the decision. Thank you, Dr. Chen. The review committee evaluated all applications based on 4 criteria: relevant experience, cost effectiveness, cultural competency, and alignment with our mission. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, which showed the scoring matrix we'd used. Based on these criteria, we're recommending 3 firms for different aspects of our legal support needs. I went through each recommendation, explaining why we'd selected firms that specialized in international development law, had experience working with indigenous communities, and understood the complexities of operating in developing countries. What about the other applications? Asked Dr. James Morrison, the representative from USAID. Were there any that came close, but didn't quite meet the criteria? This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating. There were several strong applications that we ultimately couldn't recommend, I said. Some lacked international experience, others had cost structures that didn't align with our budget constraints. I paused, looking down at my notes. There was one application in particular that I need to address separately. Langford and Associates submitted a comprehensive proposal, but I have to recuse myself from any discussion of their application due to a conflict of interest. Murmurs went around the room. Dr. Chen looked surprised. What kind of conflict of interest? Gregory Langford is my father. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Your father applied for this contract, Dr. Morrison asked. Yes. And while I've tried to review his application objectively, I think it's appropriate for the rest of the committee to make the final decision on whether Langford and Associates should be considered. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Thank you for disclosing that, Naomi. Given the potential for conflict of interest, I think we should exclude that application from consideration entirely. Agreed, said Dr. Morrison. We can't risk even the appearance of impropriety. And just like that, my father's application was rejected. Not because it wasn't good enough, although honestly, it probably wouldn't have been selected anyway, but because his daughter had become too successful, too influential, too important for his firm to even be considered for the work he desperately needed. The meeting continued for another hour, finalizing contract terms and discussing implementation timelines. But I barely heard any of it. I kept thinking about my father, probably checking his email every few minutes, waiting to hear whether his firm had been selected. That afternoon, I was back in the Brightcore Labs office when Lena burst through my door with a bottle of champagne. "We did it," she said, grinning from ear to ear. "Did what?" "The Kenya contract came through. The government just approved our proposal for a nationwide deployment of learning hubs in rural schools. $250 million over 5 years. I stared at her. 250 million. 250 million. Plus, the Indonesian government wants to expand our existing pilot program, and there's serious interest from Nigeria. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what she was telling me. In the span of 6 months, Brightcore Labs had gone from a scrappy startup to a company managing contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "There's more," Lena said, popping the champagne cork. "Time magazine wants to put you on the cover of their education innovation issue, and Fast Company is doing a feature on Brightcore for their most innovative companies list." Time magazine. Time magazine. The cover story is called "The Dropout Who's Changing Global Education." I laughed, shaking my head in disbelief. My father's going to love that headline. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a photography studio in Manhattan, posing for the Time magazine cover shoot. The photographer kept asking me to look visionary and determined, which mostly just made me feel awkward. But when I saw the final images, I had to admit they'd captured something. I looked confident, successful, like someone who belonged on the cover of a major magazine. The article came out the following month, and it was everything I could have hoped for. It told a complete story, from my decision to leave Columbia Law to that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, to building Brightcore Labs from nothing to our current partnerships with governments around the world. But the part that meant the most to me was a quote from Dr. Maria Santos, the principal of our first pilot school in Honduras. "Before Brightcore Labs came to our village, our children could only dream of having the same educational opportunities as kids in the cities. Now, they're learning computer programming. They're connected to students around the world, and they believe they can accomplish anything." Naomi Langford didn't just bring us technology, she brought us hope. The magazine hit newsstands on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests, partnership inquiries, and speaking invitations. But the call that mattered most came Friday afternoon. "Naomi, this is Dean Harrison from Columbia Law School." I nearly dropped the phone. Dean Harrison had been the one to process my withdrawal from the program 3 years earlier. "Dean Harrison," I said carefully. "This is unexpected. I've been following your work with the Brightcore Labs, and I wanted to reach out personally. What you've accomplished is extraordinary." "Thank you. In fact, I'm calling because the university would like to offer you an honorary doctorate. We think your work in sustainable education technology represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want to celebrate." An honorary doctorate from the school I'd dropped out of in shame and disappointment. "That's incredibly generous," I said. "But I have to ask, is this because of the Time magazine cover?" Dean Harrison laughed. "Naomi, this is because you've revolutionized how we think about educational access in developing countries. The Time magazine cover just reminded us that we should have been paying attention sooner." So, the honorary doctorate ceremony was scheduled for the following spring. I would be receiving the degree alongside a Nobel Prize winner, a former Secretary of State, and a legendary civil rights activist. Not bad for a law school dropout who used to work at a coffee shop. But while my career was reaching new heights, my father's was collapsing. The rejection from the Global Access Council had been a major blow to Langford and Associates. Word had gotten out in the legal community that they'd been passed over for a significant UN contract, and potential clients started questioning whether the firm really had the expertise they claimed in international law. Then, the New York Law Journal ran a story about law firms struggling to adapt to the growing demand for ESG compliance expertise. Langford and Associates was mentioned specifically as an example of a traditional firm that had failed to evolve with changing client needs. Sebastian called me one evening in February, about 3 months after our Thanksgiving reunion. "Naomi, I need to talk to you about something." "What's going on?" "It's Dad. He's talking about retiring." "Retiring? He's only 62. "I know, but the firm it's not doing well. We've lost 8 major clients in the past 6 months. 2 of the senior partners are talking about leaving. Dad's convinced that the legal industry has passed him by." "What about you? Honestly, I'm ready to come work for Brightcore full-time if you'll have me." "Sebastian, you'll always have a place at Brightcore, but are you sure this is a big change?" "Naomi, I've learned more about law in the 3 months since we've been working together than I did in 5 years at traditional firms. This is the kind of work I actually want to be doing." My father announced his retirement in March. The official statement said he was stepping back to pursue other interests. But everyone in the legal community knew what that meant. Gregory Langford, who had spent 30 years building his reputation as one of the most successful attorneys in Manhattan, was being forced out by his own irrelevance. The day the announcement came out, I found myself thinking about that Thanksgiving dinner 3 years earlier, about his words, "You'll be nothing without me." But sitting in my corner office overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge with a team of 40 employees working on projects that were literally changing lives around the world, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. Not really. Revenge would have been using my position to actively sabotage his firm, or publicly humiliating him, or refusing to help Sebastian when he needed it. But that's not what had happened. What had happened was much simpler and much more powerful. I had built something real, something meaningful, something that existed entirely independently of my father's approval or support. And in building that thing, I had become someone that even he had to respect. The honorary doctorate ceremony took place on a beautiful Sunday morning in May. I sat on the stage at Columbia University, wearing the same academic regalia I would have worn if I'd graduated from law school 3 years earlier. My parents were in the audience. So were Lena, Sebastian, and most of the Brightcore Labs team. But as I looked out at the crowd of faculty, students, and families, I realized that their presence, while meaningful, wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that I was here on my own terms, being honored for work that I'd chosen to do in a field that I'd discovered by following my own instincts, rather than anyone else's expectations. When Dean Harrison introduced me, he said, "Naomi Langford represents the best of what education can achieve. Not just the accumulation of knowledge, but the courage to use that knowledge to solve real problems and improve real lives." After the ceremony, my father approached me as I was talking with some of the other honorees. "Naomi," he said, "could I have a word?" We stepped aside, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I wanted you to know," he said finally, "that I'm proud of you. Not just for this," he gestured toward the diploma in my hands, "but for everything, for having the courage to walk away from law school when it wasn't right for you, for building something extraordinary from nothing, for proving that I was wrong about everything." "Dad, no, let me finish. I spent so many years believing that success had to look a certain way, that there was only one path to respect and security. I tried to force you into that path, and when you refused, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life." He paused, looking out at the campus around us. "But you weren't making a mistake. You were just seeing something I couldn't see. You were seeing the future." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That night at Thanksgiving, when you told us about Brightcore Labs, had you already decided not to hire my firm for the Global Access Council contract?" I thought about it for a moment. "Dad, I reviewed your application the same way I reviewed all the others. But honestly, even if there hadn't been a conflict of interest, you probably wouldn't have been selected." You didn't have the relevant experience. He nodded slowly. I figured as much. We were reaching, trying to break into a field we didn't understand. It's not too late to learn, I said. Sebastian's been working with our legal team for months now. He's become one of our best international compliance specialists. There's room for experienced attorneys who are willing to adapt. Are you offering me a job? He asked with a slight smile. I'm saying there's room in this world for people who are willing to grow and change, even if they're 62. 6 months later, Gregory Langford officially joined Brightcore Labs as Senior Counsel for International Affairs. He took a significant pay cut from his days as a named partner, but he also rediscovered something he'd lost years earlier, the sense that his work was actually making a difference. Today, Brightcore Labs operates in 47 countries. We've brought educational technology to over 2 million children in rural communities. We've created thousands of jobs and pioneered new approaches to sustainable development that are being replicated around the world. And yes, we're profitable. Very profitable. Last year, Forbes estimated my personal net worth at over $500 million. But you know what? That's not the part of the story that matters most. The part that matters is this. 3 years ago, my father told me I would be nothing without him. And he was wrong. I wasn't nothing without him. I was everything I'd always had the potential to be. I just needed the freedom to discover it for myself. The best revenge wasn't success, though success was certainly satisfying. The best revenge wasn't proving him wrong, though I definitely did that. The best revenge was letting him apply for help from the daughter he once called nothing, and then, when he finally understood who I'd become, having the grace to help him anyway. Because that's what you do when you're secure in who you are. You don't need to punish people for underestimating you. You just prove them wrong and then move on to more important things, like changing the world. If this story showed you that sometimes the best revenge is just proving people wrong, hit that subscribe button for more stories about people who turned their biggest setbacks into their greatest comebacks. What's the most satisfying way you've ever proven a doubter wrong? Let me know in the comments below.